Welcome back, my fellow Python programmers, to a brand new video, and in this one we're going to be looking at loops in Python. We're going to look at how we can loop through entire lists, how to work with indentations and how to avoid errors in indentations. We're going to look at how we can create numerical lists and work with ranges. We'll explore how we can slice lists and go through these sliced parts. And we're also going to look at tuples, and then at the end we're going to have a challenge where we apply everything that we've learned in this video. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started. If at any point you feel that you're enjoying the contents of this video, please make sure to slap that like button because I need to fight the YouTube algorithm. So this is a list of pizza toppings. We've already seen how we work with lists. If you haven't, you can go to the previous video. I've left a link somewhere at the top. So a list of pizza topping, and we've printed out each element of this list on a separate line. Seems easy enough. But what if we were working in a restaurant and this wasn't just a simple or small list of toppings? So as you can see, now we have a much longer list. And if I wanted to print all of these pizza toppings out, you'd see that it would print out, everything would work the same, but we have to work a lot to print all of this out. What if there was a way for us to do this automatically and really fast? Well, thankfully, there is. So, as you can see right here, instead of using all of these lines, which are about 14, you can see that we only needed 2 lines to print every single topping of our pizza out. So what we did in here is we defined a for loop that pulls the name of the toppings from the pizza toppings list, and inside the loop we printed out that topping. So let's go ahead and take a little bit of a closer look. To instantiate a for loop, you need to start with the for statement. Then we name our temporary variable. This variable is then associated with every value pulled from the list. You can choose any name you want. However, it's always helpful to choose a meaningful name. So for example, in here we chose topping. We could have just called this X and then wrote X in here. And if I right click and I run, you'll see that the output is the same. So it doesn't matter what you name it, but as I told you, since we're going through pizza toppings, it's better to have toppings as the name. And finally, we have the in statement followed by the name of the list that we're pulling from. You can do anything that you want with the value that you got. So instead of simply printing out this simple topic name, we can put it in some kind of sentence and print it out like so. And inside of your for loop, you can actually write as many lines as you want. So as you can see, instead of simply printing out a single line inside of the for loop, I printed out I like to have pepperoni, or whatever the topping is. Yum, pepperoni is the best, and then I left a blank line in order to separate between these different outputs. So now I wanted to show you what happens when we actually finish with the for loop. As you can see, we just continue on as normal. The program continues executing. Once we've went through all of the toppings, at the end we get enjoy, and because we don't have any other line of code except for the comments which do not execute, we don't have anything to output anymore. So now that you've learned how to use a for loop in order to automate or do a simple task multiple times, now it's time to look at indentations. You've seen indentation, you're probably wondering what these things are that I still haven't talked about, so let's go ahead and delve into them. So you might have noticed that right here we have a bit of extra space, to be precise 4 spaces behind every single line inside of the for loop. These are called indentations, and they help Python understand how a group of lines is related to the rest of the program. So for example, in here, you'll notice that the print is inside of the for loop, so it's being printed out multiple times. But what would happen if I remove the space from behind it? And if you want to remove the space, you simply hit Shift Tab. So now there's no longer an indentation, and if I right click and I run, you'll see that now the only space is right here, and other than that, there's nothing happening. There are two things that you need to watch out for whenever you're working with indentations. First of all, forgetting an indent. So if I remove the indentation from behind the yum, again using the Shift tab, you'll see that it actually breaks the loop and we have an error. How did I know that there's an error before running the code? Because we have these small squiggly red lines. If I hover over it, statement expected, indent, right click and run, and boom, unexpected indentation, which is right here. The second potential error that you can get is extra or unnecessary indentations. So if I add another indent behind this print and I right click and I run, you'll see that I have an unexpected indent error again right here. And by the way, this can happen to any line of code. So Shift tab, and if I hit tab twice right here, again I get an error, right click and run, and it tells me an unexpected indent right here on the print enjoy. Python uses indentations to delimit blocks of code, so make sure that you use them very, very carefully. And the last thing that you need to be careful of when you're working with for loops is these two colon or this one colon at the end. Make sure that you never forget it, otherwise it just causes an error. Alright, so that was the basics of indentations. Now let's go ahead and look at how we can start generating lists, or to be more precise, generate numerical lists, work with them, and look at how ranges work. Let's go ahead and continue on. Even though Python is an extremely versatile language and can be used for almost anything, it's most known for its data handling abilities. So in many instances, you're going to have big lists of numbers. The for loop combined with this range function allows you to generate numbers in an instant. So for example, right here, what we did is we generated numbers 1 through 10 using something called the range function. If you hover over this range, you'll see that we get this documentation, and you'll notice that we have a start and a stop. But notice something very important. Even though we start at 1 and we've specified 1, we don't actually end at 10. And why is that? Again, if I hover over it and look at the documentation, and whenever you get something like this, always hover over it or go research it on Google to understand why weird things happen. And if we read right here, you can see that returns an object that produces a sequence of integers from start, which is inclusive, to stop, which is exclusive by a certain step. So the start is included, the 1 is included, but the 10, that is the stop, is not included. So in order for me to get 10, I actually need to write in here 11. When I right click and I run, I get 1 through 10. Okay, so in here what I did is I initialized an empty list. An empty list is initialized like this. You just have 2 square brackets on either side with nothing in them. Why did I initialize it like this? Because what I wanted to do is I wanted to create a for loop over a range going 1 through 11. Remember, 11 is excluded. And then I take the value and I multiply it or take it to the power of 2 and then put it back into the value, and finally I append this value, and finally I print out the squares. Oh, I apologize, I append this value to the squares, and finally I print out the squares. So if I right click and I run, now I have a list of 1 through 10, but each one of those numbers is to the power of 2. And notice how fast that is, or that was, for me to create. You might be telling me, well, I would have done it in the approximate same time, but imagine if you needed to do this 1 through 100 or 1 through 1000, or sometimes you might be working with datasets that are millions of values inside of a list. And here's also a few fun functions that you can use on your numeric lists. For example, so as you can see, we can use different functions on our numerical lists. First of all, we can use the max, which you can hover over every single one of these. Max allows us to get the biggest number. So right here, the biggest number is 100. we can have the minimum, which gets us the smallest number, which is 1, and finally we have the sum that returns the sum of all of these numbers. So if you sum these together, I'm not sure if that's the exact number, but I'm confident in Python's ability to sum all of these numbers together. So we've looked at for loops, we've looked at how we can generate numerical lists using the range function. Now it's time for us to delve into slicing lists. And this is a very important part of working with lists, and we're going to see how we can loop through parts of a list and not all of it. So let's go ahead and continue on. Okay, so as you can see, again, we're back to our pizza toppings list. First of all, we printed out the first 5 pizzas, the pepperoni, mushroom, onion, sausage, and bacon. And then we printed out 8 through 13, which is pineapple, spinach, ham, artichoke, and anchovies. I don't know what these are, I just copied them from Google. So what is happening in here? First of all, as you can see, just like we've done before, we accessed elements inside of the pizza topping using these 2 square brackets on either side. Now in the previous video, we used to use a single number, like for example 5, and we would get the 5th number in here, or remember we start at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we would get extra cheese. So instead, what we're doing in here is we're telling it that we want a slice from these lists. Ironic, isn't it? We're getting a slice from the pizza topping, huh? Nice. So we go from 0, then the colon, to where we want to go, and to 5. So this is similar to the range where we have the start and the stop, and notice that when we're using the slicing, we don't get the extra cheese. What does that mean? It means that just like the range, the stop is not included. The same thing holds true in here. So we start at the 8th, which is 8, which is, I don't want to count right here, but it's pineapple, and then from pineapple we go to the 12th, which is at anchovies, which we write 13 in order to get that 12th position. You can also do the following. So when you don't specify the start, you just start from the complete beginning. Right here, I wrote nothing behind this colon, and what I got is from the complete start. And when you don't indicate the end, you go until the end. So we started at 12, which is anchovies, and we go until jalapenos, which are the last item in our list. And you can also loop through these slices. So right here, what I did is I created a for loop. The topping is the temporary variable in the pizza topping, and then I sliced from 6 to 10. Well, keep in mind that the 10 is not included, so I only like the following toppings: black olives, green pepper, pineapple, and spinach. Okay, so now that we've seen how we can work with slices of our lists, it's time to look at tuples. Tuples are like the sister or the brother of lists, so they're almost exactly the same except for a small minute detail that we're going to look at. Let's go ahead and continue on. Okay, so this was the list of John's medications. We added ibuprofen, we printed out John's medication, and now it turns out that aspirin and ibuprofen don't work together and John is dead. Don't ask me why, I don't know anything about medication. This is a Python channel, but as you can see, whenever we're working with lists, they are actually changeable. We can play around and change the values that are inside. So a list works well when working with data that we actually can or would like to change. However, sometimes you want a list of items that nobody can change, and this is where tuples come into play. So I'm going to change this from a list into a tuple by simply switching from square brackets to round brackets. And you'll see my IDE PyCharm automatically changes that. And as soon as we do it, immediately we have a highlight over here. If I run run over it, you can see that unresolved attribute reference append. There is no append to a tuple. And if I right click and I run, you'll see that a tuple object has no attribute append. Why? Because you can't actually change values inside of a tuple. And even if we try to manually change a value inside of this tuple, you'll notice that we also get a highlight because tuples don't support item assignments. If you right click and we run, you'll see that tuple objects do not support item assignments, and this is the line of code where we are facing an error. And we can also loop through tuples just like we do with lists. So tuples are basically lists that should not and cannot be changed throughout the execution of a program. Okay, so we've looked at tuples, we've looked at lists, numeric lists, how to loop through these, how to use the range. Now it's time for a bit of a challenge, which is a mini project where you have to test out all of the knowledge that you've acquired so far. Let's go ahead and do the challenge. Okay, so your challenge is going to be the movie list. We have a list of the best movies. The list is going to be in the description or the top comment, and we want to print them out and manipulate them. So first of all, you need to print out my favorite movie is, and then the movie title for all the movies using a for loop. Next, you'll need to print out the first 4 movies, the last 3 movies, and the movies 3 to 9. You'll need to create a list of numbers from 1 until the entire length of the movies. If you don't remember how to get the length of a list, then you need to watch the first video or go do the research yourself. Use this numbers list to create a list of tuples. Each tuple contains a number and a movie associated with it, and then you'll need to print all of this out properly. So for example, you need to have 2, The Godfather, and so on and so forth. From the list of tuples, print out the movie titles again in a sentence. So now from this list of tuples, you need to try and print out only the movie titles, and also you'll need to, of course, be using the for loops. Research how enumerate function works and apply it to the movie list. And finally, how can this be used to create the same list of tuples more easily? Meaning that this enumerate function that you just discovered, how can we use it to more easily create a list? So pause the video right now and go do the challenge. Okay, so this is our list of movies. By the way, you can use any list that you want, just make sure that it's at least 10. So right here, my favorite movie is the movies, and we used a for loop to print everything out. This is the temporary variable, this is the movies list, and we used the temporary variable as a value right here in our printout statement. Okay, so back in here, as you can see, we've printed out first of all the first 4 movies. I didn't add anything at the start, which means that we actually start from the first element and we print out the first 4 movies. Then I printed out the last 3. I started at 7 because remember we have 10, so I start at 7 and I go until the end. And finally, movies 3 to 9. I printed out 3 to number 10 because remember it's not included. And by the way, there was a easier way of printing this line out. So I'm going to duplicate, comment out, and then instead of 7, use -3. And remember this, The Good, Bad, and the Ugly, Fight Club, and Forrest Gump. When I right click and I run, you'll see that I still get the following. So how does this work? Well, if you remember in the previous video where we talked about lists, we can actually use negative indexing. So Forrest Gump would be -1. Fight Club would be -2, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly would be -3. So when I write -3 until the end, what happens? Well, you can guess, we print out the last 3 in here. If you didn't do this one, don't worry about it. If you did, you're a legend. Continue on. Okay, so the next challenge was to create a list of numbers. I just initialized the numbers list. I created a for loop from I in range 1 through the length of movies plus 1. And then I appended this I to the numbers. So my question to you is, why did we do length plus 1? Well, because remember, our goal is to actually give each movie a number next to it. So basically what we did in here is we got the length of the movies, and remember the length of the movies is 10 because 1, 2, 3, 4, 10. We have 10 movies. So in order to actually number the last one, which is 10, we have to add plus 1, so it becomes 11, so that it goes to number 10. If I remove this, you'll see that we only go to 9. Okay, so for the next challenge, you needed to create a list of tuples using the list of numbers that we just had. Now, to be frank with you, this is a very hard challenge because what you needed to do was, first of all, you needed to get the numbers list, get the movies at I, and then make a tuple out of them. Notice that right here I created a tuple and then append that tuple to the number movie tuple list. Very simply, I just instantiated or initialized the numbers movie tuple. I created a for loop. The I was the temporary variable over the range of the length of the movies. And then in here, for example, let's call this T is equal to the following tuple. And then I simply appended T. So I created a tuple, first of all, from the numbers right here. Using the I accessed the numbers and then the movies, and I created this list of tuples. If that was too hard for you, no worries, this is a bit of a challenging challenge to do. And finally, I just printed it out in a nice looking way. Okay, so the challenge was for you to access the names of the movies from the movie tuple list. So remember, right here what we have is a list of tuples, and I told you that tuples work just like lists. So 1 is at index number 0, or for example, let's take 8 is at index number 0 of each of these tuples, and the name of the movie is at index number 1. So what I did is I simply went through the movie's tuple, and then I had the temporary variable that is movie tuple. Remember, we store the value of each item from the numbers movie tuple in this temporary variable, and then I accessed the element at index number 1, which was the movie, and I got I love watching Shawshank Redemption, I love watching The Godfather, I love watching The Dark Knight, etc, etc. Okay, so let's talk about the enumerate. So what you needed to do was research enumerate in Python, and you could have used the Geeks for Geeks or W3 Schools. I personally prefer W3 Schools. So if we go right here, you can see that the way that enumerate is used and so on and so forth. But I'm basically going to give you the gist of it. I recommend that you read through this documentation and also you go through the Geeks for Geeks. But basically what happens is the enumerate returns a tuple of the index and value immediately. When I right click and I run, you can see that I get value, I get index and value. And I can also hover over this enumerate and I can see what it returns. And by the way, what we do in here is called unpacking tuples. Whenever we have a single value and from it we set two values, this is called unpacking a tuple. Don't worry about this for now, but if you ever encounter it, you'd know that this is called unpacking tuples. And we have the index and the value, and this is how it looks. Okay, so final challenge, which was to use the enumerate to create a list of tuples. Now we've already done this right here at the top, but this time it was much easier because instead of creating a list for the numbers and then having a list for the movies, we can simply use the movies list. We went through the movies list and then we got the index and the value just like we've done before. We unpacked this tuple and then we appended with this tuple. Remember, this is a tuple, we're appending it into the enumerate movies list, and we did index plus 1. Why? Because the index starts at 0, and we wanted it to start, oh no, thunder. We wanted it to start at 1. So, fellow Python programmers, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. And if you did, please make sure to leave me a like. If you have any questions, please make sure to leave them in the comments below. Also, if you have any recommendations for a future video, you can also leave them in the comments below. If you enjoyed this kind of content and if you got to the end of this video, please make sure to subscribe. And in the next video, we're going to be looking at if statements. So you should click right here. Wait, let me move you the mic for you. Right here. If statements. Continue on your programming journey, your Python development journey. Let's go.